What if I told you the difference between you and a criminal might be just one decision? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the shadows of human behavior. We're going to deconstruct the exact architecture of transgression, using the latest clinical research and criminological data to understand the precise mechanics of why people cross that line. This isn't just theory. This is a deep dive into the hidden motives and moral breakdowns that govern the darkest corners of our society.
It's the oldest question in psychology, really. Are criminals born, or are they made? For decades, society clung to this simplistic myth of the born evil villain. And it was comforting in a way, right? Because it meant they were fundamentally different from us. But here is where psychology reveals something much deeper, and honestly, a lot more disturbing. Modern criminology completely rejects that simplistic narrative. As we'll see throughout this journey, criminal behavior is a highly complex, deeply human equation. It's this fatal collision of biology, mind, and circumstance. So let's begin breaking down that equation.
Section 1. The anatomy of a choice. You see, crime, in most cases, isn't just some random explosion of chaos. It's actually a deeply calculated act, driven by hidden, incredibly powerful motivations. When researchers analyze the psychology behind these acts, they generally find two primary drivers, pushing individuals to break the law. On one side, you've got utilitarian motivations. This is cold, calculated, goal-oriented behavior. Crimes committed for money, resources, or literally just simple survival. On the other side, we have hedonistic motivations, and this is where it gets psychologically complex. These are crimes driven by the sheer, dangerous thrill of the act itself, the rush of adrenaline, and the pursuit of excitement. Most youth crimes, the data shows, stem from one of these two deeply ingrained human desires, material gain or pleasure-seeking.
But motivation alone isn't enough to push someone over the edge. And this brilliantly illustrates our next concept, situational action theory, or SAT. This theory proposes a terrifying reality. A crime only occurs when a person's criminal propensity, meaning their internal moral rules and their level of self-control, collides with an environment that provides the perfect opportunity. Think about that for a second. People don't just commit crimes because they're simply bad. They commit crimes when their internal moral compass wavers just enough and the external situation makes it incredibly easy to get away with it. It's the fatal intersection of person and place.
Section 2. Trauma and the broken mind.
So, what corrupts an internal moral compass in the first place? To answer that, we need to step into the internal, psychological shadows where the very early seeds of transgression are planted. It often starts with the clinical traits of psychopathy, which is actually one of the strongest predictors of persistent criminal behavior across a person's lifespan. We're looking at a profound lack of empathy, a chilling absence of remorse, and a superficial charm used entirely for manipulation. But perhaps the absolute most dangerous element here is high impulsivity. Low self-control creates a mind that constantly seeks immediate gratification, completely blinding the individual to long-term consequences. But we really have to ask, does a brain start out this way, or is it broken over time?
Well, that brings us to adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. We're talking about severe physical abuse, neglect, or chronic exposure to violence during the most vulnerable years of a person's life. But here's where it gets really disturbing. This isn't just emotional damage we're talking about. Severe trauma physically alters the neurological development of a child's brain. It literally rewires their stress responses, significantly increasing aggression and antisocial behavior later in life. Now, we don't view trauma as an excuse for violent acts, but in the clinical world, it is universally recognized as a highly dangerous psychological catalyst.
And that biological component is absolutely crucial. Abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and moral reasoning, hormonal imbalances like abnormally high testosterone, and embedded genetic predispositions all play a massive part. Now, the key takeaway here is this. Having these biological markers does not directly cause someone to commit a crime. You aren't doomed by your biology. But it does create a deeply embedded vulnerability. And if a biologically vulnerable mind is put into the wrong environment, the results can be catastrophic.
Section 3. Nature, Nurture, and Survival.
Shifting our focus from the internal mechanics of the mind to external pressures, we see that society itself can act as a massive pressure cooker. Robert Agnew's strain theory defines exactly how this happens. When human beings experience chronic stress, whether that's from severe poverty, inescapable trauma, or completely blocked life goals, it generates a profound, suffocating frustration. When legal avenues for success, status, or even just basic survival are cut off, the mind begins to justify illegal alternatives. Crime simply becomes a coping mechanism for an environment that feels entirely hostile.
But the environment dictates behavior in other ways too. If we look through the lens of social learning theory,
Step 1 is observation. If a youth grows up surrounded by family dysfunction, gang culture, or peers who normalize violence, well, that simply becomes their baseline for reality. Step 2 is reinforcement. If they see that crime brings respect, money, or protection, a clear reward, the behavior is locked in. The data on this is unequivocal. Youth exposed to criminal peers are significantly more likely to offend. We are heavily programmed by the people around us.
Section 4. Inside the criminal mind.
Now this changes everything we thought we knew about free will. To truly understand these concepts, we need to take them out of the textbook and put them right into the real world. Let's examine a clinical analysis of 3 very different case studies. First up, Alexander Friedman in the US. He was a former inmate who became a renowned reform activist, but later inexplicably committed highly complex, calculated crimes. The psychological mechanism at play? Severe, unresolved trauma from prison abuse and identity conflict. It proves that without intervention, deep psychological damage can force criminal behavior to reemerge years later. Then, we have repeat sex offenders. Research shows their crimes are driven by a stable, terrifying demand for sexual gratification combined with deep-seated anger, motivations that rarely change without intense clinical intervention. But let's look at the Italian mafia.
Let's zoom in on that mafia case study for a moment, because it perfectly illustrates the chilling reality of moral disengagement. How do normal human beings commit atrocious acts of violence for a syndicate? Well, by submitting to group norms and actively suppressing their personal morality. Inside the group, empathy is viewed as a weakness. Through a psychological trick of identity suppression, the individual diffuses their own guilt into the collective. Terrible acts aren't just justified anymore. They become completely normalized. They literally become just business.
Section 5. The formula for transgression.
We've looked at the trauma, the biology, the societal strain, and the clinical cases. Now we look at the exact, split-second moment a human being decides to cross the line. The countdown to a crime almost always begins with this: the opportunity. A vulnerable, unguarded moment suddenly presented by the environment. An open window, a distracted security guard, a moment of absolute privacy. The environment whispers that the rules have been temporarily suspended.
And in that suspended moment, rational choice theory activates. A rapid, incredibly cold calculation happens in the mind. The individual looks at the opportunity and asks, is the ultimate reward, the money, the thrill, the power, worth the inherent risk of getting caught? If the biology is vulnerable, if the trauma is loud, if the societal strain is crushing, the mind says yes.
And that brings us to the integrated model of criminal behavior, the ultimate synthesis of modern criminology. Crime equals psychological traits and biological risk, multiplied by environment and social influence, multiplied by opportunity and situation. If any one of these factors is 0, the crime often doesn't happen. It's never just one thing. It is the fatal alignment of an internal risk, external pressure, and being in the wrong place at the exact wrong time.
So how do we stop it? If crime is a complex equation, our solutions absolutely cannot be simple. Effective crime prevention must be interdisciplinary. We have to intervene early in childhood before trauma permanently rewires the brain. We must provide robust mental health support to rebuild broken self-control. We have to reduce the crushing strain of poverty and inequality that drives so much desperation. And practically speaking, we must control criminal opportunities in our environments. We simply cannot arrest our way out of a psychological and sociological crisis. We have to sustainably address the root causes.
We've reached the end of our investigation. We've seen the biology, the trauma, the pressure, and the ultimate calculation. The line between a normal citizen and a criminal is terrifyingly thin, governed by forces both inside our minds and out in the world. So I leave you with this to reflect on. In the exact same environment, carrying the exact same trauma, would you have made a different choice? Was it choice or circumstance? Comment your thoughts on this video. Also, subscribe to us to see more videos like this in the future. See you in the next video.